Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, June 15, 2022. The Federal Reserve raising interest rates by 0.75%, the biggest hike since 1994, and saying that more increases are likely on the way in the coming months in an effort to get under control levels of inflation not seen since 1981. U.S. House passing a bill designed to promote racial and ethnic equity in financial services. FDA Advisory Committee giving its endorsement to COVID-19 vaccines for children as young as 6 months, one step closer to approval. The House Select Committee to investigate the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol releasing video that it says shows a tour the day before led by Republican Congressman Barry Loudermilk, with some on that tour taking reconnaissance photos. And then, on January 6th, one of the men marching to the Capitol and the riot there threatening Democratic House and Senate leaders. Attorney General Merrick Garland announcing hate crimes charges against the Buffalo, New York mass shooting suspect. As work continues in the U.S. Senate to turn a bipartisan framework to address gun violence into legislative language that can be voted on. But the lead Republican negotiator, Senator John Cornyn, pointing to a few snags that still need to be worked out. Supporters of DACA, the program protecting young undocumented immigrants from deportation, marking the program's 10th anniversary, and President Joe Biden hosting an LGBTQ Pride Month celebration at the White House. And we start with more on that COVID-19 vaccine news. This from USA Today. America's youngest children could soon have access to a COVID-19 vaccine made by Moderna. An expert panel on Wednesday unanimously found Moderna's vaccine safe for children ages 6 months to 6 years old and provided protection against COVID-19. The committee is scheduled to vote on the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for a similar age group later in the afternoon. If its decision is upheld by the Food and Drug Administration's commissioner and then the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, vaccines will be available for young children as soon as Tuesday. That from USA Today. And now to interest rates. This from Associated Press. The Federal Reserve on Wednesday intensified its drive to tame high inflation by raising its key interest rate by 0.75 points, its largest hike in nearly 3 decades, and signaling more large rate increases to come that would raise the risk of another recession. The move the Fed announced after its latest policy meeting will raise the benchmark short-term rate, which affects many consumer and business loans, to a range of 1.5% to 1.75%. That from AP. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell making the announcement at a news conference today.
I will begin with one overarching message. We at the Fed understand the hardship that high inflation is causing. We're strongly committed to bringing inflation back down, and we're moving expeditiously to do so. We have both the tools we need and the resolve that it will take to restore price stability on behalf of American families and businesses. The economy and the country have been through a lot over the past 2.5 years and have proved resilient. It is essential that we bring inflation down if we are to have a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. From the standpoint of our congressional mandate to promote maximum employment and price stability, the current picture is plain to see. The labor market is extremely tight, and inflation is much too high. Against this backdrop, today, the Federal Open Market Committee raised its policy interest rate by 0.75 percentage point and anticipates that ongoing increases in that rate will be appropriate. In addition, we are continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our balance sheet.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, the latest inflation report from the month of May in the U.S. running 8.6% year over year, highest rate in 4 decades. Inflation target for the Federal Reserve is 2%. More from Chair Powell about why the interest rate increase today, larger than the 0.5 point that he previously suggested, would be announced.
Coming out of our last meeting in May, there was a broad sense on the committee that a 0.5 percentage point increase in the target range should be considered at this meeting if economic and financial conditions evolved in line with expectations. We also stated that we were highly attentive to inflation risks and that we would be nimble in responding to incoming data and the evolving outlook. Since then, inflation has again surprised to the upside. Some indicators of inflation expectations have risen, and projections for inflation this year have been revised up notably. In response to these developments, the committee decided that a larger increase in the target range was warranted at today's meeting. This continues our approach of expeditiously moving our policy rate up to more normal levels, and it will help ensure that longer-term inflation expectations remain well anchored at 2%. As shown in the SEP, the median projection for the appropriate level of the federal funds rate is 3.4% at the end of this year, a percentage point and a half higher than projected in March, and 0.9 percentage point above the median estimate of its longer-run value. The median projection rises further to 3.8% at the end of next year and declines to 3.4% in 2024, still above the median longer-run value. Of course, these projections do not represent a committee plan or decision, and no one knows with any certainty where the economy will be a year or more from now. Over coming months, we will be looking for compelling evidence that inflation is moving down, consistent with inflation returning to 2%. We anticipate that ongoing rate increases will be appropriate. The pace of those changes will continue to depend on the incoming data and the evolving outlook for the economy. Clearly, today's 75 basis point increase is an unusually large one, and I do not expect moves of this size to be common. From the perspective of today, either a 50 basis point or a 75 basis point increase seems most likely at our next meeting. We will, however, make our decisions meeting by meeting, and will continue to communicate our thinking as clearly as we can.
The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at a news conference at the Fed headquarters in Washington, D.C. An article from Insider says the hike was approved by 10 of the Federal Open Market Committee's 11 voting members, with Kansas City Fed President Esther George voting against the increase. Wall Street today, the Dow up 303, NASDAQ up 270, S&P up 54. CNBC writes that stocks jump after Powell signals Fed will stay tough on inflation. Dow snaps 5-day slide. Another article from CNBC, President Joe Biden on Wednesday called on U.S. oil refining companies to produce more, saying they need to help alleviate the burden of high prices on consumers. The president said in a letter to oil companies, including ExxonMobil and Chevron, at a time of war, historically high refinery profit margins being passed directly onto American families are not acceptable. National average for a gallon of gas crossed $5 over the weekend for the first time on record, according to AAA. A question about this letter to the White House Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
In the letter from the president to the refiners, he said they need to work with the administration to bring about a near-term solution. Is there an or else in there from the president? Is there some way that the administration plans to try to hold these companies accountable? You use the word responsibility in your message at the top here.
We see it as a patriotic duty, as we've talked about. There's war happening right now in Ukraine that was caused by Russia, which is why we're seeing these hikes in gas prices, especially since Russia has started amassing troops on the border. We've seen a $2 increase of gas prices. So we know where to put the blame on the war, but oil companies, oil refineries, they have responsibility too. What they have been doing is taking advantage of the war, and as I showed earlier, they have tripled their income, and so this is a problem. But what we're trying to do by putting out the letter, we are saying, hey, we need you to act. It is time to act. We want to have a conversation. We want to come to a solution. There is going to be a conversation later this week, I believe, with the Energy Department, and so that's going to happen. So this is basically a bit of a, hey, we want you to act. It's time to act. We have done our part with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the 1 million a day for the next 6 months, and so we need them to act. So that's where we are. We want to come to solutions, which is why we say we want to have that conversation, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Is there something the president's considering to compel them, or a consequence if that does not happen?
I don't have anything nothing right now to preview as to what would come next. But what I will say is that we are calling on them to do the right thing, to be patriots here, and not to use the war as an excuse or as a reason to not put out a production, to not do the capacity that is needed out there, so that the prices can come down.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters in the White House briefing room. Inflation also a major topic on the Senate floor. Comments from Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the Republican leader.
Every month, the average Kentucky household now spends over $500 more than they did before the Biden presidency. One of my constituents from Beaver Dam wrote to tell me things are looking pretty grim for me and my family right now. Everything is too expensive. His family was already giving up buying chicken and beef at the grocery store. Next, they may have to stop making car payments. They're literally out of slack. Another constituent from Science Hill told me that his family is maxing out credit cards to stay above water. He's watching as the Democrats who control Congress continue to advocate for more reckless spending and laments that Washington does not appear to understand what's happening to our heartland. A third constituent from Paint Lick is struggling because clarifies that she is not asking for a handout because she doesn't believe it would help. After all, she writes, money is not free. Taxpayers must pay it back. If only Washington Democrats had that much wisdom. If only our one-party government had exercised that much common sense back last spring.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor. U.S. House of Representatives debating and voting on a package of 13 bills titled the Financial Services Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Economic Justice Act. It includes a new mandate for the Federal Reserve to actively promote racial and ethnic economic equality. Congressman Al Green, Democrat from Texas, supporting the legislation. He says that when certain racial and ethnic minorities are denied equal access to financial services, then they need to go elsewhere for the money, and that's more expensive, and that amounts to inflation.
This bill is needed because racial disparities in lending, home ownership, and wealth creation are all too real. For some, invidious discrimination, Mr. Speaker, is only a phrase. However, for too many others, it is a fact of life. According to the Brookings Institution, the racial wealth gap between white and black households is more than $10 trillion. The onerous wealth gap is perpetuated by the toleration of ongoing discrimination, redlining, and systemic barriers to accessing financial credit and services. Some of my colleagues across the aisle may say that the House shouldn't address this important issue. They may say that the House should ignore these very real, well-documented disparities and focus on getting inflation under control. To which I say this bill deals with the very real inflationary pressures that people of color experience in their daily lives. Too often, Mr. Speaker, consumers and businesses from low-income communities and communities of color suffer invidious discrimination as they struggle to access capital and credit. Chairwoman Waters said it best, and I was there to hear her say it when she spoke before the Rules Committee this week. She noted that this type of discrimination is a form of inflation in communities of color. She indicated that when you add up inflated fees in tandem with inflated interest rates, simple loans cost more for people of color than others taking out the same loan in a different community. This, of course, assumes that you're lucky enough to qualify for the loan in the first place. And if you're not, then your options to build wealth are severely limited because you can't buy a home or start a small business. In fact, your only option for credit might be an inflated predatory payday loan that leaves you worse off, not better.
Congressman Al Green, Democrat from Texas, on the House floor. He's a senior member of the House Financial Services Committee, filling in and managing the debate for the chair. He mentioned the chair, Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, sponsor of this legislation. She could not be in the chamber today because she's tested positive for COVID-19. Congressman Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina, ranking member on the Financial Services Committee, speaking in opposition on the floor.
Republicans support improving diversity in financial services, but H.R. 2543, this bill, misses the mark. Committee Democrats had the opportunity to work with Republicans on a bipartisan legislative package to achieve that goal. In fact, 5 of the bills that make up this package received some Republican support, either in markup, in committee, or on the floor in previous Congresses. But instead of working with Republicans, committee Democrats injected this package with another 8 partisan poison pills. First, this bill blatantly politicizes the Federal Reserve. In fact, it takes the Fed, it tasks the Fed with a third mandate. And that third mandate is to close socioeconomic disparities instead of focusing on what we've asked the Fed to focus on, which is price stability and maximum employment possible. So much for the president saying he's not going to politicize the Fed or he's going to respect the Fed's independence. This bill goes completely counter to that. This bill will make credit more expensive and less accessible to those who need it most. This bill will also pile regulatory costs on small businesses, forcing them to divert resources from business operations to report on diversity and inclusion metrics outlined in this bill. Currently, businesses can self-assess the makeup of their workforce. This bill would impose a one-size-fits-all mandate on all job creators, regardless of size, geographic location, or business model. This bill is a boon for litigious trial lawyers, and it's a boon for them because they expand the ACOA, and it opens them up to new lawsuits, businesses open to new lawsuits. And this creates uncertainty in the credit markets, ultimately increasing the cost of credit, making it more difficult to assess credit risks for financial institutions and businesses. Finally, while Americans are reeling from higher prices, this bill will make it more expensive for families to purchase a home. This bill will impose additional costs on creditors and servicers, which will inevitably be passed on to those applying for loans. Bottom line, this is just another attempt by House Democrats to divert voters' attention from the big issues of the day, and that is their dismal economic record that they've foisted upon the American people.
Congressman Patrick McHenry is from North Carolina, ranking Republican on the Financial Services Committee, debating on the House floor. The House went on to pass this package of bills. The vote was 215 to 207. No Republicans voted yes, all the yes votes coming from Democrats, but 3 Democrats did vote no. Carolyn Boudreaux of Georgia, Jared Golden of Maine, Stephanie Murphy from Florida. The bill now heads to the Senate. From thehill.com, the House committee investigating the attack on January 6, 2021, has released footage tied to a tour Congressman Barry Loudermilk, Republican of Georgia, gave the day before, showing a man taking photos of hallways in the Capitol complex before ultimately attending the rally itself. Loudermilk has acknowledged showing a small group of constituents around House office buildings the day before the attack, but claimed those participants immediately turned back once they saw the chaos developing at the rally. But video shared by the committee claims one of the men was at the riot, showing clips of the unarmed man marching toward the Capitol the morning of January 6th. That reporting from thehill.com. Here are a few parts of the video released by the January 6th investigation committee, the parts of the video that have sound. The first one says it's the man going to the speech of former President Donald Trump that day, January 6, 2021.
It has begun here at the Washington Monument, Washington, D.C. Say hello to Facebook.
Hey, what's going on, man? Glad to be here, bro.
This is our fearless leader.
Hey, baby.
Danny Hamilton.
Check out my flag I made, guys. See it? There you go, baby. That's for a certain person.
That's right. That's for somebody special. Somebody special.
And another part of the video released by the January 6th investigative committee that has audio is the men leaving the speech of former President Donald Trump that day, marching to the U.S. Capitol building.
All right. We are basically at the Capitol with probably close to 2 million true American patriots. They are swarming and converging, mainly from Constitution Avenue, but from all routes in. There's no escape, Pelosi, Schumer, Nadler. We're coming for you. We're coming in like white on rice for Pelosi, Nadler, Schumer, even you, AOC. We're coming to take you out. We'll pull you out by your hairs. How about that, Pelosi? Might as well make yourself another appointment. I'll get done with you. You're gonna need a shine up on top of that bald head.
Part of the video and audio released by the January 6th committee on Twitter, it includes the caption, "Surveillance footage shows a tour led by Loudermilk," that's Congressman Barry Loudermilk, to areas in the House office buildings as well as the entrances to Capitol tunnels. Individuals on the tour photograph recorded areas not typically of interest to tourists, hallways, staircases, and security checkpoints. That was the still, or the video that doesn't have any audio on it was in there. And then what you just heard was the video of them actually going to the speech by former President Trump and then to the rally. Congressman Barry Loudermilk himself putting out a statement that reads in part, "As Capitol Police confirmed, nothing about this visit with constituents was suspicious. The pictures showed children holding bags from the House gift shop, which was open to visitors, and taking pictures of the Rayburn train. The false narrative that the committee and Democrats continue to push that Republicans, including myself, led reconnaissance tours is verifiably false." The next hearing of the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol is tomorrow, Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. The focus will be former President Trump's pressure campaign against former Vice President Mike Pence not to certify Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election. We'll have live coverage on the C-SPAN networks. That is tomorrow, Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. 2 witnesses are scheduled. Greg Jacob, former counsel to Vice President Mike Pence, and Michael Ludick, retired judge, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, and an informal advisor to Mike Pence. A mixed bag in South Carolina Republican election primaries from Tuesday night for former President Trump's endorsements for U.S. House seats. A victory as incumbent Tom Rice, who voted to impeach Donald Trump, lost to challenger Russell Fry, but another incumbent, Nancy Mace, who criticized Donald Trump's role in inciting the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and the challenger, Katie Arrington, got Donald Trump's endorsement. Well, Nancy Mace beat Katie Arrington. Here's Tom Rice interviewed by WCIB-TV in Charleston Tuesday night.
I had hoped that the situation would be reversed, but again, this seat doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the voters, right? And so it's what they want, not what I want. And all I have to tell them is that I just am so blessed and privileged to have had the opportunity to represent them for 10 years. I'm so proud of all the things that we got done to lift people up in this district for the last 10 years, and I wish them nothing but the best.
Congressman Tom Rice Tuesday night as he lost the Republican primary for re-election. Here is Congresswoman Nancy Mace, a Republican of South Carolina, giving her victory speech from the primary.
I am looking forward to very much continuing the work that we started when we flipped this seat in November of 2020. I promised when I ran in 2020 that I would be an independent voice. I promised that I would not toe the party line, especially when Republicans spent too much and taxed too much. With record inflation and the challenges we're seeing today at the gas stations and the grocery stores, we need strong fiscal conservatives, people who are going to be serious about balancing the budget, who are going to be serious about cutting taxes, who are going to be serious about finding solutions to the challenges our country faces today. And one of those challenges, as we saw very recently, was about the baby food shortages. I had a mom just a few weeks ago text me as I'm on the flight down from D.C. back to the Low Country and talking about the baby formula shortage. She couldn't find it in the grocery stores in Charleston. She went to different retail locations, could not find it, went to import it and buy it from Europe, and it got seized by the customs when it came into the United States. Now, we have a great staff and a great team. They got it released very quickly, but those are the challenges that everyday families are facing in our country today. And guess what? The FDA got $200 million to figure out what the heck was going on with the supply chain. They knew about those shortages, and they didn't do anything about it. No, they did not. We've got to have serious leaders, stable leaders, people who are going to work to get things done, and I'm proud of the record that we have so far. In Congress, in my first 16 months in Congress, we passed 16 bills out of committee. We passed 4 out of the floor of the House. And the last bill I passed out of committee was a cybersecurity bill. And every single member, Republican or Democrat, Freedom Caucus or Squad, every single member of Congress voted unanimously on the Oversight Committee to pass that bill. And that is the kind of leadership that I promised to bring in 2020, that I promised to bring forward in 2022, to get this country out of the crises that Joe Biden has created. And it starts right here in the 1st Congressional District, because the only way Republicans are going to get a majority in November is if we win swing districts, purple districts, just like South Carolina's 1st Congressional District. Getting the majority starts right here in South Carolina. So what are we going to do in November? Keep the first. Thank you, Low Country. Thank you to all the voters who turned out today. Thank you, Katie Arrington. God bless the Low Country. God bless South Carolina. God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina, Tuesday night after winning the Republican congressional primary against a Donald Trump-endorsed opponent. Republicans also flipped a congressional seat in Texas's 34th district that was held by a Democrat in Tuesday's special election. Republican Mayra Flores getting 50.1% of the vote. She'll be filling the unexpired term of former Democratic Congressman Philemon Vela, who resigned to take a lobbying job. So there will be another election for this seat this coming November. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy tweeting historic win, incredible job, congrats to you and your team, hashtag Red Wave. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio just got easier. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Important congressional hearings and other public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Catch Washington Today for a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
And welcome back to Washington Today for Wednesday, June 15th, 2022. Washington Today is available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. Story from CNN, the Department of Justice has filed multiple federal hate crimes charges against alleged Buffalo shooter Peyton S. Gendron, which carry the potential of the death penalty. The complaint filed by prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of New York states that Gendron's motive for the mass shooting was to prevent black people from replacing white people and eliminating the white race, and to inspire others to commit similar attacks. Gendron, 18 years old, who is white, shot 13 people, 11 of them black, at the Tops Friendly Market on May 14th. 10 of the victims died. Attorney General Merrick Garland traveled to Buffalo today to meet with the family of the victims and announce these new charges.
The complaint we have filed today charges Peyton Gendron with 10 counts of committing a hate crime resulting in death, 3 counts of committing a hate crime involving an attempt to kill, 10 counts of using a firearm to commit murder during and in relation to a crime of violence, and 3 counts of using and discharging a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence. The affidavit in support of the complaint quotes the defendant as stating that his goal was to, quote, kill as many blacks as possible. The affidavit outlines how the defendant prepared for months to carry out this attack. It alleges that he selected a target in this zip code because it has the highest percentage of black people close enough to where he lives. He selected the Tops store because it is where a high percentage and high density of black people can be found. And he made a map of the inside of the Tops store, quote, and decided the best plan of attack for the highest chance of success. The affidavit also notes that the defendant chronicled this plan on his Discord messaging account in the months leading up to the attack. Citing that account, the affidavit alleges that the defendant wrote about his acquisition of firearms and other supplies for the attack and traveled to Tops on multiple occasions to sketch the interior of the store, count the number of black people present, and observe the presence of black security guards. On May 14th, the defendant arrived at Tops wearing a tactical-style helmet, camouflage clothing, body armor, and a GoPro video camera, and carrying a loaded Bushmaster XM15 rifle and multiple loaded magazines. The affidavit alleges that he repeatedly targeted, shot, and killed black people. At one point, he aimed his rifle at a white male Tops employee who had been shot in the leg and injured. Instead of shooting the white employee, the gunman apologized to him before continuing his attack. Ballistics evidence recovered at Tops indicated that the gunman fired approximately 60 shots during the attack. In the days and weeks since the attack, we have all witnessed the strength of this community's bonds, its resilience, and its love. I am humbled to have just felt that firsthand in my discussions with the families. Hate-fueled acts of violence terrorize not only the individuals who are all attacked, but entire communities.
U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland in Buffalo, New York today. Back in Washington, the U.S. Senate continues its off-the-Senate floor work on gun violence prevention, responding to the mass shootings in Buffalo, New York, and also at the elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, trying to fill in the specifics in the bipartisan framework agreement that's been announced, putting that into legislative text that can be voted on by the senators. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, chair of the Judiciary Committee, talking about this bipartisan agreement at the start of a hearing today on the impact of gun violence on children.
This framework doesn't include everything I want, but it's made up of reforms that Americans overwhelmingly support. Proposals such as keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people, like convicted felons and domestic abusers. When they shoot, kids too often end up, the targets are caught in the crossfire. That's why we need reforms like better background checks, support for state crisis intervention orders, also known as red flags, and tougher laws to crack down on straw purchasing and gun trafficking. I've said it before, but it bears repeating. Last year, we lost a wonderful young Chicago police officer, Ella French. She was in the Inglewood section of Chicago. I'm sure Mr. Willingham knows that section. She was on duty at night, and unfortunately, at a traffic stop, she was gunned down, and her partner was seriously injured, lost the use of his right eye. It turned out that the gun that was being used to kill her was a straw purchase gun that had been purchased in Indiana by a man who admitted he had no criminal record and purchased it to give it to another man who was a convicted felon who ended up killing Officer French. That is the reality. I attended her memorial service with my wife, and I saw a sea of police uniforms coming to pay their respects to this wonderful young woman. So when we talk about straw purchasing, please don't dismiss it. To many of us, it's very, very important. This framework also recognizes that harms of gun violence go beyond bullet wounds. Gun violence is traumatizing an entire generation of American kids.
Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, chair of the Judiciary Committee, at a hearing today on gun violence and children, referring to the bipartisan framework that's been agreed to. Senator John Cornyn of Texas is the lead Republican negotiator in that group of 10 Republican senators and 10 Democratic senators who put together the framework. He is also a member of the Judiciary Committee, and he spoke to reporters in the hallway outside the hearing room about the ongoing talks to turn the framework into legislative text. He said he's a little concerned about some of the details. One, funding for the so-called red flag laws, and the other, closing the so-called boyfriend loophole.
I'm starting to get a little concerned, though, that there are a couple of issues that need to be settled before we can reach an agreement. One of the issues has to do is whether the funds that we will vote for will be available to states that don't have red flag laws but do have crisis intervention programs and things like mental health courts, veterans courts, assisted outpatient treatment programs, things like that. Well, the other issue has to do with the way that non-traditional relationships are handled in terms of domestic violence misdemeanors. We got to come up with a good definition of what that actually means.
And Senator John Cornyn of Texas, those two clips from the conversation with reporters outside the committee room today posted by CNN. Red flag laws deal with allowing a court to prohibit gun possession or purchase of someone deemed a threat. And that boyfriend loophole deals with a gap in federal law which bars domestic abusers from having guns, but the definition is for those who are married, living with, or having a child with, not just dating. CNN's chief congressional correspondent Manu Raju tweeting that Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, and Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, part of the Democratic negotiating team, both believe the issues are resolvable. Coons saying there's lots of pressures, pro and con. There are some details to work out, but I remain very optimistic that we'll get a bill together and get it to the floor. More from the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing today. Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas with his thoughts on how Congress should respond to the mass shootings.
Over and over again, we have seen these horrific crimes. And whenever they happen, there is a call that predictably comes out. A call of do something. Now listen, I agree with that call. I agree we need to do something. But I also believe we need to do something that actually will work, that will stop the next mass murder, that will keep people safe. I don't want to have to see another parent like Mr. Schachter who lost his son. The pain and agony you've experienced and far too many others have experienced. It is the worst nightmare for any parent. If we want to stop these murders, we know the approach that actually works. The approach that actually works is twofold. Number one, focus on the bad guys. Focus on the criminals. Focus on the felons and fugitives and those with serious mental illness that try to illegally buy firearms. Prosecute them and put them in jail. Get them off the streets. It also means that when people carry out crimes with firearms, prosecute them and lock them up. Make it a priority. You bring a gun to a crime and you are doing hard time. Get the trigger pullers off the streets. And then secondly, enhancing safety and security of vulnerable targets, and especially schools. Since Columbine, one after another dark, twisted monster has decided the way he can achieve what he thinks is immortality is go and murder little children. Now, I will note that I make it a policy never to say the names of any of these shooters, and I would encourage every member of this committee and every member of the press, these evil bastards deserve to be forgotten forever. But we can do a lot more to make our schools safer. Mr. Schachter, thank you for your efforts pushing common sense legislation to make schools safer. I think the legislation you're fighting for makes a lot of sense. Repeatedly, I've introduced legislation to go after the criminals, to go after the felons and fugitives and those with serious mental illness, to prosecute them when they illegally buy firearms, to get them off the street, to prosecute the gun criminals, and to provide resources to schools, to make schools safer, to install safety equipment in schools. You and I sat down, Mr. Schachter, in my office, and we talked about how frustrating, how maddening it is that at schools we keep seeing the same pattern over and over again. The monster in Parkland went through an unlocked back door. The monster in Santa Fe went through an unlocked back door. The monster in Uvalde went through an open back door. We keep having the same vulnerabilities and not fixing them.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, at today's Judiciary Committee hearing on gun violence and its impact on children. You can find the full hearing, which we covered live on C-SPAN Radio, at our video library at cspan.org. Today is the 10th anniversary of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. In 2012, then President Barack Obama issuing the executive actions protecting all eligible immigrants who came to the U.S. as children from deportation. A news conference today outside the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, including Senator Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, a supporter of this program.
We're here for two reasons. One is to celebrate 10 years since President Obama established a Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. It was a victory of tireless advocacy from people like all of you, immigrant youth from around the country, and many in Congress who pushed the Obama administration to do the right thing. It's been 10 years since hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants were given the opportunity to go to school and work in the only country they have ever called home. I say about Dreamers all the time, the only flag they pledge allegiance to is that of the United States. The only national anthem they know is the Star-Spangled Banner. The only country they have ever called or felt is home is the United States of America. And so, we want to say unequivocally and unapologetically that the progress and gains and the triumphs of the past 10 years are here to stay. Today we say with one voice, no vamos para atrás. We are not going back. We are only going hacia adelante. We're going forward as we look to build on the success that began as DACA. The 10-year anniversary of DACA is a reminder that movements matter, that the work all of you are doing today still matters. Your work and your advocacy has not only changed thousands of lives across the country, it's changed the very way that Congress views undocumented family members. I remember in 2012 when I was sitting at the White House in front of President Obama with our former colleague, Congressman Gutierrez, and other members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus at the time. We said to President Obama, you have the power to issue executive authorities that, in fact, can protect these people. He said, no, I don't believe I have that power. We went back and forth. To make a long story short, we are here celebrating because of the work that was all done and how we convinced President Obama then to use these executive powers. 10 years later, we are calling on the Biden administration to use its executive authority to protect as many undocumented immigrants as possible. We're asking them to expand DACA eligibility and not be afraid to defend that position in court. And we are asking them to use their parole authority to shield DACA recipients from deportation in the event that the courts rule the wrong way and that they lose their status this summer. The administration had executive authorities to protect Ukrainians, which it should. We expect the same commitment to protecting as many undocumented immigrants as possible. And while we are pushing the Biden administration to act, we're not giving up here in Congress. That's why, regardless of what the Fifth Circuit does, I want to see votes taken on common sense propositions that the House has passed, and I don't want to divide one group against another. I don't want to protect just some dreamers. I want to protect all dreamers, and I want to protect their families. And God willing, with your help, that's exactly what we're going to do. Thank you very much.
Senator Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, a news conference outside the U.S. Capitol building today in Washington. He mentioned the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals set to consider a lawsuit from Texas challenging DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. That's going to happen in July. It's the latest in a long series of challenges over the past decade. Former President Barack Obama putting out a statement saying DACA lifted the shadow of deportation from people of extraordinary promise, and the results for them and for all of us cannot be denied. He said more than 800,000 people have received DACA protection since the program began, including 200,000 who served as frontline workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. President Joe Biden signing a new executive order seeking to protect LGBTQ plus youth from some state laws that erect barriers in education, healthcare, and housing. It was part of a Pride Month celebration at the White House.
I don't have to tell you about the ultra-MAGA agenda attacking families and our freedoms. 300 discriminatory bills introduced in states across this country. In Texas, knocking on front doors to harass and investigate parents who are raising transgender children. In Florida, going after Mickey Mouse, for God's sake. That's right close to home. No, but think about this. All of you in this room know better than anyone that these attacks are real and consequential for real families. For real families. Just look at what happened in Idaho last weekend. 31 white supremacists stopped just before they reached the Pride celebration, where they apparently planned to unleash violence on people gathering peacefully in a show of their pride. I'm grateful for the swift response of law enforcement, and they responded. They responded. Violent attacks on the community, including ongoing attacks on transgender women of color, make our nation less safe because the attacks are more than ever last year, and they're on pace again this year. They're disgusting, and they have to stop.
President Biden at the White House at a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer plus LGBTQ plus Pride Month event celebrated in June because it was in 1969 in June that the Stonewall Uprising happened in New York City, a pivotal event in the history of gay rights. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can get more of Washington's daily top stories sent to your inbox by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. I hope you have a good night.